Why, hello everybody. My name is Steve Usher and a warm welcome to the Experienced Designers podcast. Before we jump in, I have a favour to ask. If you haven't already, please like, follow or rate this podcast. It goes a massive way to growing our audience and inviting future guests onto the show. So thank you in advance for your support. So our mission in this podcast is more human experiences. So my next guest, Theo Smith, is bringing a massively unique lens to this in the form of neurodiversity. And if you're struggling to understand what this even is or how it applies to you or your business, I promise you one thing, it is relevant and already exists in your business. It's just a matter of whether you understand it, are asking the right questions, or prepared to adapt and evolve to it. And a reflection I made post this interview, I see nothing but untapped potential for everyone involved and opportunities to truly create more human experiences. So without further ado, I give you Theo Smith as we explore the topic of neurodiversity. Theo, welcome to the Experienced Designers.
Woohoo! Great to be here. Love it.
Amazing, mate. Amazing. Firstly, so grateful that you've agreed to join and contribute to the show. Really, really appreciate it. And this topic that we're going to explore together, I come to this episode naive. I've got to be honest. Naive in the sense of what neurodiversity as a topic, because it's such a broad and all-encompassing rainbow that we can explore together. But also, upon a personal level, my children are neurodiverse in their own right as well, with special gifts in their own special way. So I'm not only a father to dyslexic children, but also I'm so curious. I've observed this topic from an educational perspective, but of course I'm really curious to see from a business lens as well what we can dive into. So look, thanks for sharing and thanks for joining. So look, let's dive in. Theo, who are you? Where are you? And why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Theo Smith. I'm a actor by trade, but before that I failed at school, but some people reminded me that I was failed by school rather than I failed at school. So I really struggled academically. Interviewed my cousin the other day and he had the same challenges. Very strong in certain areas, but not in the areas that they want you to be strong in school, right? So good at chatting back, good at causing chaos, good at having huge amounts of energy, but not necessarily in sports when they want you to have huge amounts of energy. Just like all the things in the wrong places. And when you're a young person, that can be a problem, right? And it can get you into a lot of trouble. And it did get me into a lot of trouble. So I kind of just found my way. You need to work to eat and you need to eat to live. And therefore, you just do what you can. But there's something there. There was something there that kept driving me. And I was lucky enough as a young person to be involved in community theatre. And then that got me into youth theatre. And then that got me into a university in the end with no qualifications. And then that eventually got me into being an actor. But it was a tough gig. And again, with the brain that I've got, and I didn't know at the time, I was struggling with seeing things through and struggling to commit stuff and struggling with other things going on, like investing my energy and time in things that weren't good for me. Right? They weren't progressing me and helping me. And in the end, I found my way into sales and then into recruitment. And then I've worked across all different types of organizations. And it was my daughter. So you talked about in the introduction, your children. I kind of put up with it. I've been in some tough places and I don't know, I hadn't really made too many connections with my brain. Diagnosed at university with dyslexia at 21. But I kind of shelved it because it it didn't answer so many questions for me. The things they wanted to give me to help me didn't help me. You know, putting colored screens didn't make any difference to me. The biggest impact was my impulsivity and my energy and my burnout and my inability to write as well. I'd never really properly been taught to write essays or anything like that, so I kept failing on that basis. When I was sat in a hotel room on my own, I was working for an organization, living away from home 3 days a week. My son had just been born. I carried on doing that for 2 years. And I saw a program called ADHD and Me with Rory Bremner. And he was exploring that he may be ADHD on this program on the BBC. And I was sat in this hotel room on my own and a light bulb hit. And then I made the connections. There were other people in my family who were ADHD, autistic. I'd been diagnosed with dyslexia. And then it was working with a group called the RR100, the Resourcing Leaders 100, that I got introduced to neurodiversity, and my brain just exploded. So that's what, when you sit in a room and somebody goes, you can actually be autistic, dyslexic, and ADHD. And by the way, it is a natural part of your brain, right? We've had 200,000 years it's taken to create the brain that you and I have, right? The modern brain, 200,000 years of evolution. Actually, it's not changed that much in many respects, but it has in others. You know, it's evolved to the environment. The environment we live in today is probably 100, 200 years max. Globalization, industrialization, the Internet of Things, rockets that go into space, rockets that destroy things, AI, machine learning, the way that we now see the world and that we invest energy in the world because the world is at risk. All of these things are modern concepts and ideas that we try and fit a brain that's taken 200,000 years to evolve. And we're now going, can you just evolve into the environments with bright lights, evolve into the chicken coop little boxes that we put you in organization. Your brain has to evolve quickly. Well, it's like, no, it's 200,000 years. So we need to consider that in terms of the adaptations, things that we do. And that's what kind of really drove me, that I saw my daughter was being marginalized because of the way that her brain worked and system impacted negatively. And I knew that lots of other people were. So for me, it was like when you've got a child, you can see is going to be treated unfairly, like, bull, China shop, I'm going at it. and that's where it started. But I also, through that journey, realized that I also associate with ADHD and autism traits, and of course I'm dyslexic as well. And that's where all of this energy and work and focus has come from, through the lens of my experience as a HR and recruitment leader.
Amazing. And what's from the neurodiverse work that kind of light bulb moment? What's been the journey from that point onwards? Where has that kind of taken you? What kind of just what focus areas?
Well, so when something happens like that, and you realize, oh, that's me. So that's me they were talking about when they were stood up in front of me talking about neurodiversity. That's my child they're talking about. That's my family. That is, and you weren't aware before. That triggers something, right? Or it doesn't. Either you just go, whatever. Or for me, it was, how can I now get recruitment leaders and HR leaders to do something about this? Because I've worked within the political sphere. I've worked in government organizations, right? I know how difficult it is to create sustainable change within government, within education. And so we need people to do it. But that, like the mechanisms, the influence that you have to have, and the tireless energy you have to give to that, is something that I thought, am I the right person to do that when I already have significant influence within this HR and recruitment community? And that community can literally, by my words and influence, can go and change systems and practices in the organization tomorrow. And that is the truth. And organizations are doing that. So that was the light bulb was, people are being marginalized, people are being system impacted, people are being locked out, yet some of the most incredible brains that we can record in history that have been transformational, and in modern times, people who solve some of the most complex problems. We think about Alan Turing with AI and machine learning. That came from a period of significant crisis. What are we in now? What have we been in? COVID, the wars, the planet, all of these things, right? I'm thinking we are in a moment of significant crisis like we've never experienced it before, right? But we also are in a period of incredible opportunity where we could eliminate significant things like homelessness, like poverty, like lack of ability to access education, like all of the, but it's almost like the two things, one pushes against the other. And that's the same with the human brain. Your strengths and challenges, one can push against the other. If you allow people to force you into your challenges, how can you then deliver on those strengths? If people are surrounding you by kryptonite, right, it is so debilitating that you struggle to do the thing that you can and you've previously done. So when I'm thinking about neurodiversity, when I'm thinking about every single one of us has a unique brain, every single one of us, but not all of us have been marginalized or system impacted because of the way that our brain works. And autism, ADHD, dyslexia have existed since the beginning of time. Right? Let's not kid ourselves that they're a disease, they're an illness. No, they're impacting factors that mean we may not be able to do X, Y, Z. Some of them are social. Some of them are where we were born, the family we were born to, how much wealth or lack of thereof, whether we're able to access education, whether we're able to access healthcare support, early intervention, which meant we may not have developed speech in the right way or communication skills. All of this impacts then on how we see, interact, engage with the world. It's not that we are autistic or dyslexic or ADHD, because we have people in the fields hunting, farming, a long, long time ago, and they would have had these unique, incredible brains. But it's just now, because of this last 100 years of significant change and transformation, where it becomes a significant barrier. And it's that thing there that I'm passionate about.
I can see that.
And getting people to see that you can make the change. You can make the change, or you can ignore it. And a proportion of people will ignore it, and they'll see the world in the way that they want to see it. You go do it. You carry on doing that. I'm not going to waste my energy on you. I'm going to go and find those people who want to understand this incredible concept of the human brain is the most powerful thing that we have, right? That's the thing that created AI, and that's the thing that created some of the technology that saves lives. It's the human brain that achieved that. And therefore we need to better understand it and enable it. And it's the barriers that we put up. We put them up.
Yeah, and I think what's coming to mind and hearing this journey is it's just systemic. It's so systemic. And how do we kind of, both in terms of education, and it's a very much streamed, and if you're outside of that stream, then you're pretty much buggered, actually, and has all sorts of consequences. I'm really, I see the light that you've also seen. I think it's really interesting that you're bringing this, or certainly driving this into TA, because they are effectively the gatekeeper of new talent coming into the organization. But then, of course, further upstream from an employee journey or experience into onboarding, into then, in-life experience, like their day-to-day interactions. Like, how do we get organizations to unlock the potential of the most captive audience that they have as a business, their people, and actually get them, and like to understand their brains, to understand what they actually have and unlock all that potential, which would require them to move outside of a systemic and this kind of, typical systemic environments that we have. But where do you see that, Theo? I'm really curious around that, because I think that's something which, there was some stats we shared in our pre-work, wasn't there, around how many people have some form of neurodiversity, brain. So what are some of the stats? Because that would also give some context. If someone had 1,000 employees, it would give a context to how many are actually neurodivergent in their own right today.
Definitely. So let's cover some of that. First of all, I'm going to say this in response, and then we'll cover that after some of the stats. But experience is absolutely the central core of how we're going to solve this, right? That's first of all. And experience, we only understand it by asking those people as they go through that process, right? So we only know if somebody is experiencing something positively or negatively by either looking at them, right, and they're screaming in pain. We know that's not a good thing. Or by asking them, right, was that nice? So experience is really important. And we don't do enough, right, because we fear what's going to be said and what's going to come out of it. We'll keep the lid on Pandora's box. But some of the data and stats, right, the evidence that we had showed lower figures. So it was like, up between 8 to 10% of people were dyslexic. And these are stats that came out by people ticking boxes, right? But the problem we've got with boxes is not everybody can tick them, and we'll come to that in a second.
Yeah.
So, and then the stats were like 1% people are autistic, 3% people ADHD. However, we now know those stats are really not properly reflective. So the type of data and insights that we now get is around 20% are probably dyslexic. We know a high proportion, 5, 6, 7% are probably ADHD. The reason specifically around ADHD is a lack of diagnosis in girls and in women. So we know that only about 1 in 4 or 5 women have an ADHD diagnosis versus men. And we now certainly know that it's not a male thing, right? We're like, the data's telling us that it's men that are more likely to be ADHD. No, the data was rubbish because our method for diagnosing women, like I found with my daughter, was, do they line up dinosaurs? Do they know all the names to stars? Do they, like, all the different questions? I looked at them, and as somebody myself who looks for the truth in something, so I'm like, I struggle sometimes to see the nuance in a question, right? If somebody says, do they line up dinosaurs? For me, it's yes or no. And no, she does not. Do they line up cars? No. So she doesn't play with dinosaurs. She doesn't play with the cars. She doesn't know names of dinosaurs. She doesn't know names of stars. So she's not autistic. And the reality is that was one line that was really poor. And the other lines that we have is things around how they show up. So women and girls, everybody may mask to a greater lesser extent, dependent on the reason for masking, right? But for women, they're much more likely to significantly mask, to the extent that they may just be a very quiet child in the back of a classroom. Now, the problem is that has an impact. We also know that women are affected by migraines, for example, visual aura, seizures. They may then go on to have challenges around eating, an eating disorder, or, so you start to build all these things up. And if you come right back to the point, it's around diagnosis. So there's data and stats. If I just give you like an overarching figure, we're talking about 20 to 30% who are impacted in such a way that at some point, the way their brain works, right, would have stopped them being able to do something within either their personal environment, with their relationships, or within the role that they've been given. And the reality is as roles change and develop, and managers change, and strategies change, and focus changes, that can have an impact. And as people go through different stages of life, it can improve. Therefore, you might get more focus because your role might become more strategic. But what if it becomes more operational again? I had that experience. It can significantly change your ability to deliver in that role. What if your manager, I've had several instances of this, is dyslexic, and my best managers have been dyslexic, and then they're not. And therefore, all of that natural empathy and understanding and appreciation, without you even having to tell them, there's just a natural understanding and empathy when you say, I'm really struggling to organize my brain with that. Like, where do they go with it if they don't understand it and don't have the empathy? And that's where the training and intervention come in. So when we think about 3 in 10 of your workforce, I went and did some work with an organization. We did a survey. I did a lot of work with them, months of work of audit, assessment, healthcare company. And what came out of it, they were shocked by it. They were like, 1 in 10 of your workforce identifies as being autistic, ADHD, dyslexic. And I've done workshops with them before, so they understood the terminology and everything. And they were like, wow, 1 in 10 of our work. Whoa, we're going to have to do something about this then. And I went, no. I said, 2 in 10 of your workforce. 2 in 10 more above the 1 in 10 also say, well, we haven't got a label, but based on all the information you've given us, we think that we are. That's 3 in 10. And they're like, what? And then the board, I'm advising them and giving them this information. I had a 3-hour meeting to present this back with them. And then I went, no, we're not done yet. And lots of other things we covered. I said, around 4.5, almost half, right? Almost half of your workforce said they are responsible for somebody. So child, friend, family member, that they have some level of responsibility for who is autistic ADHD, right? That's almost half their workforce. And they felt like, we're a healthcare company, the types of jobs we've got, probably it's not relevant, we can't see it. No, it's absolutely relevant, because actually a lot of people who are autistic and ADHD and dyslexic often have high levels of like a stake in the ground for truth and honesty and integrity and the like. And sometimes that can come across as like aggressive or but we think of some of the leaders who challenge the status quo, Greta Thunberg as an example. Like, there's a line that you draw which is right and wrong. And therefore, when you put that in the context of a healthcare environment, lots of people are driven to be there because they have an opportunity to help somebody. And therefore, that is a powerful driver to be able to go and care for somebody. And there's a misconception that people who are autistic may not care. No, that's completely wrong. It's that there's a line of like this level of truth that they will draw. And therefore, that can seem like if I said to you, something like, you look really grumpy and unhappy today and you don't look very well. Like for a lot of people, I'd be like, I don't really feel nice after you've told me that. But there's a truth. I've seen you and I'm telling you exactly what I'm seeing. Like that can become a challenge, but actually in an instance of care and consideration and making sure somebody is being looked after, like that truth can hurt. But in terms of actually making sure you're keeping that human being alive, then it can really become very impactful, because you're not allowing anything to get past. You may not make assumptions. You've seen it as it is. I see this has happened, therefore their life is at risk. I see this has happened, therefore they're not being cared for properly. I've seen this happen. I'm not happy with it. I'm going to let somebody know. And so it's these things that become very powerful and impactful. But it's the data that we're now seeing that is starting to make organizations go, what? Like 1 in 10 to 2 in 10 to 3 in 10 to almost half my workforce. Most organizations don't even know the data. They've not even asked the question. So they have no idea of the experience.
No. And, oh my God, so much to unfold in that one. So I just how my brain works in this scenario. So my immediate thought is, oh my God, how much potential opportunity there is in the 1 in 10, the 2 in 10 specifically, to utilize their way of thinking to benefit the business, to seek different perspectives, different ways of working, different thought processes to business challenges. How do companies look to unlock that? And before you answer that one, a couple of things come to mind. Also, just some thoughts or examples that I've heard. I can't remember the guy's name, but I know there was like a famous British architect, and his company business was very active in hiring dyslexics because they had such a natural ability to see things in a much more three-dimensional format rather than just a flat 2D. And their ability to work in that profession. And they were able to leverage that skill set and that brain in that context to create, amazing new levels of work. So, how can companies do that and become more aware and move into that to unlock what they have now in their business?
So this all kind of came about. Specialisten, which is a European company by origin, started sending consultants in who are autistic into organizations like IBM and Microsoft as consultants and into leading banks and what have you. And the way that they were doing it then is they were getting these consultants who were developers and testers, and they were getting them in training, looking after them and dropping them in as consultants. Now, they were able to protect them, protect their interests, make sure they were well looked after. And then what these companies were seeing was significant increase in performance. Like, they were like, what? How are these people so good? And that's when you saw organizations like Microsoft and IBM and others setting up autism at work programs, because they were like, well, if we can have consultants dropped in, why are we not developing our own kind of internal consultancies that we can benefit from? So that's a very simple way to capture incredible talent who may not otherwise get through your systems and processes by nature of the experience is poor. Because somebody who doesn't look you in the eye, somebody who may struggle to explain what they do, but may be able to show what they do, somebody who may have a real problem with talking about their strengths and their abilities and what they've achieved, but you put them on a football pitch and they're going to score you 40 goals a year, or you put them on a hockey pitch, or you put them on a basketball court, or you put them on a, let's stop with the talk and get with the action, right?
Yeah.
But there's certain things that you have to do so they don't keep getting injured, so that they don't spend more time with the physio than on the pitch. So there's certain things that you have to consider in their physiological and neurological makeup. And that's what Specialist did, and that's what these big organizations started to do. There have been programs in like eight years of making, right? And so when you talk about utilizing these skills and abilities, organizations have been doing it, and especially those organizations at the very top, if you think about technology. But now organizations are doing it across the space. So we've got postal companies who utilize autistic talent with checking packages, because you have to be very systematic in terms of your approach to check packages, because things could be put in packages that can have a negative impact, right? So it's a very critical role, very analytical role, and there's certain people, not everybody who's autistic is good like this, right? I'm not, but there are certain people who are like have a hyper ability in a very particular area, which means they see things in a way that nobody else sees, which when you've got a job like that I think when I talked to this postal company, they were outperforming others by about 10%. Accuracy, right? So you've had similar stats come out within banking and within technology, that when you get the right kind of model, you'll see outperforming. But you do need to understand what's going to work for them. Now, the trick and the challenge we've got is transitioning that into business as usual. And then when we consider you've got all these people in your organization already, right? So we've got the people who are being locked out, and people forget to do this, right? You've got the people who are being locked out. 80+% of people with an autism diagnosis in the UK, US, similar stats, are out of work currently. COVID has had a negative impact on this, right? More than about 7 or 8 in 10, right? Out of work. But the problem is, like I just told you, there are many, many, many people who are not out of work, who are in work, who are autistic or ADHD or dyslexic, right? That doesn't mean at some point they're not going to hit a wall and not be able to get back into the workplace. Chatting with somebody whose son was at Google for 10 years, left Google, now can't get back into work, right? Because they came out of education, winning all these awards, high achiever, academically brilliant, got into Google 10 years later, left Google. Where do they go? This is back to the autism at work programs. If you're put in a space and a silo and looked after, but maybe not developed, maybe not promoted, and then you're left out, where is your route after that? So there's definitely some work to consider around that as well.
My God.
But so it's not just the talent you've got. What are you doing with them? And so there's 10, let's call it 10% for argument's sake. 10% of your employees are currently underperforming. Why? Well, imagine they're underperforming because of the systems and processes in place are no longer meeting the needs of their neurological makeup, right? And what if actually it was before? Why can't it again? Sometimes the change in the direction of organization is so significant that becomes a challenge. Auto Trade in the UK, they were a magazine one day, they were a tech company the next day, right? That change requires a complete transformation of like 3,000 people to a 700-person company overnight, right? And complete change in skill set. That is one thing. And by the way, they do incredible work in inclusion when they made that transition. If we consider most organizations, they're not going to that extent of change and transformation, yet they have people underperforming and they're losing people left, right, and center. Now, it's because they're not thinking about opening up Pandora's box, right? And then accepting that there's going to be a period of pain of transition, but ultimately you potentially are going to fly after it. A lot of tech companies, a lot of unicorns, a lot of fast growth organizations are already highly neurodivergent, right? Because they've had the ability to see it quickly, see what the giant tech companies are doing, and just embed it as part of their culture and the development of the organization and the experience that candidates get right through the recruitment process. But you mentioned it, onboarding. Most indie talent, right? They come in, you may do a good experience, you may get them through the door, but the onboarding bit, they die a death because they may fear asking questions. They may be very experienced, technically brilliant, or commercially astute, but they may struggle with the new systems, technology, processes, people, right? And if you're not giving extra time and consideration, coaching, support, extra training for managers, they'll go within a year. And then you're like, how did we lose that talent? And these are the problems, but the opportunities. The other thing is commercially, if you don't want to think about your current talent, which you have to, right? But if you think also about your customer, I did work with a health and wellbeing company that as an organization, they're like a few hundred people, but their user base is 2.5 million people. So I've worked with them at not just helping their workforce, but actually creating content to engage and connect with their user base. And how many organizations are not thinking, not just about their neurodivergent people, the people who don't fit into the whatever the typical norm is, but actually the 20 to 30% of your customer base. If you can empower your ND people, you start to empower your consumer, customer, whatever. And the greatest example I saw of that was where I worked with a tech company, and when they created a neurodiversity ERG, almost overnight, the employee resource group, neurodiversity employee resource group, the people in that group started going back into their teams and developing technology with neurodiversity front and center. So all of a sudden they were adapting and creating technology for young people who are autistic, for example, within their school environment, or for gamers, considering the technology they were developing, like mics and everything else, with autistic or ADHD young people in mind. Imagine that gives such wealth of experience to the employee, the value they're giving to their kids.
Empowering.
And the
it's empowering.
But also, the consumer base goes, yay, at last somebody's caring. I'm going to buy all my technology from you because you've shown that you care about my community. It's powerful.
Amazing. What comes to mind here as well is it's going to require, and you kind of mentioned this already, or touched on it, around research and listening and understanding. Because I think, just from a broader employee experience topic, we're seeing organizations and that requirement to understand their people in a much more intrinsic and deeper level. There's something in me as well as around enabling this as well, or enabling leaders and managers inside organizations, because, there's going to be, there are a ton of managers out there who have a team of which 10% are statistically ND and they have not got a clue. So where's some of the work to do in that to get in the trenches? Because I know a lot of stuff is put on leaders and managers. There's so much for them to do these days, to be aware of, in addition to coaching and leading and performance and all these other things. But of course, this awareness level, what do you see in that piece around just empowering, enabling, educating this kind of middle management level inside businesses?
Yeah, so I think training is an important thing, right? But training is a tricky one because they go, we got too much training. We got training for everything. But you've got to think about removing the barriers that exist within the organization. And the only way that you're going to do that is either a combination of things. You can audit your systems and processes, and therefore the managers don't necessarily, that's not a pressure on the managers. Leadership needs to take a view to invest in that. And then when you look at all the different stages across an employee life cycle and where the pain points are, you can start to adjust them. And by the way, they are different in different organizations. So, some organizations would have invested, they'll have somebody who's amazing at onboarding, right? And the onboarding experience will be like the best, but their recruitment experience will be really poor. So it's knowing where the pain points are, or your training and development, for example, may not be accessible. So even though it's good content, like for me, depending on how it's structured, and if I can't find what I need at the point that I need it, it's no use to me, because the way that my brain works and because of my poor working memory, there's just too much information going through my head. And therefore, I'll keep getting anxious about not being able to use something. And I'm going to start to zone out. Like, if you just knew that was the case, that's the bit you can double down on and fix. And then that's where you're helping the managers, right? That's not saying, manager, you need to be more neuro-inclusive. Manager, you need to make sure your team's perform. Manager, how many autistic people have you got in your team? Hire some more. No. Look at your systems, your processes, your procedures. Look at where the potential pain points are. This experience, right? And then think about, okay, what are we going to tackle? When are we going to tackle it? Why are we going to tackle it? How are we going to prioritize it? And that's the process that you take. Alongside, we will also train managers, and we will do some workshops, and we'll get people involved in maybe an employee resource group. You might not think you're big enough as an organization, so maybe that becomes a barrier initially, but then you can, it still doesn't mean you can ask the questions. When I was at one organization, I just started an email group and said, who wants to be a part of an email group within the organization where I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity, right? So every now and again, by that little email group, we had all these different systems, and we had team, we had everything, right? But this was just for me to go, let's just strip it all back. We're not asking permissions here. I'm just going to share some information with a few people about neurodiversity as I find it. Who wants to get it, right? In the end, the financial director was coming to me to go, we want to make these changes. Can you ask the group what they think, right? We're thinking about doing this. We've had some kickback on webinars about our backgrounds being busy. Can you ask the community why that is and what we can do about it? Because a lot of these comments are just confidential, and often they're people just really frustrated. So people might be going, oh, why are you doing that, right? But that doesn't help. But then you can't find the person to ask. So to be able to go to and say,
love it,
Theo, can you just go and ask? So sometimes the things that we can put in place are so simple, and the way that we can ask the questions can be protected. And if it's not through a formal, structured, heavily invested in employee resource group, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it at all, right? It just means we have to find other early stage mechanisms to be able to start to implement it, and put a commitment to, as it ramps up and the interest grows, that we then start to think, okay, how are we going to invest in it? How are we going to ensure that we get value out of it? And that it isn't just a space for people to moan. It's a productive space that we can take some action from. I think is really, really important. So organizations can do this themselves, right? They may have somebody incredible who works in audit and auditing systems, processes, parts of HR. But you can't wait till the end of the year, right? This is something you need to continually do. And you can do it within each different department as well. You do it in your bits. You can outsource it to each segment. But you have to include people who are impacted, ask them the question, and then think about each segment and where it may negatively impact. I think that's the best thing every organization can do, because they're in control of it. It's not enforcing outside views upon them. No. It is based on their world, their environment, what they're doing. And that then can give them the focus to say, that's what we're going to take first, because that's most important to us.
Yes. There was an example. I'd love you to share this on this pod, because I when you shared this story with me, I was like, oh my goodness me. Which was, I think it was Forrest. Was it Forrester? There was a manager who had a
yes.
Yeah.
So they're going to come out. I
Yeah.
recorded a podcast. They've invited me down as well to
Have they? Oh, amazing.
which I want to. So they work in forestry for an estate, and this estate in the UK is quite a prominent one. Lots of people go there. It's a visiting site, and they own lots of other things like restaurants and hotels and all these different types of things. But these people are responsible for the forestry part of the estate. And when I went and did a talk for them recently up north in one of their hotels, lots of the employees came, and two were like chatting away in between while I'm talking, which is great, right? This is, but I'm overanalyzing and processing all this all the time. I've got everything going on. I can hear the wind in the background, the trees. I see things going by. I can see these conversations. Like my brain is just whilst I'm delivering this talk. It can be a bit distracting. But afterwards, they came up to me and they said, "Oh, listen, really interesting. We'd like to talk to you about our experience." And it was a young woman who was about 3 years into her career, and this guy who was probably similar to my age, late 30s, early 40s, and he said that basically when he employed her, he had some challenges. She was having seizures, which she had told him when she joined. She was straight out of university, first class degree in forestry in Bangor, which is one of the leading universities for this, and he had also gone to the same university, obviously a lot earlier. And the seizures she told him about, but she knew no more than that. Just that sometimes she got these seizures, and she used to get quite upset, and she used to struggle with certain things that she shouldn't, like, tell me what this tree is, and it's an oak tree, and if you've got a first class degree in forestry, you're going to know what an oak tree is, and she wouldn't know, and and she struggles with guessing things, like I come back to the truth, the line. She'd struggle with being able to say what the length of something might be. Now, when you're felling trees and chopping them up and everything, he would be like, there's approximately 5 meters times 50. There's the approximate. She'd have to measure each one. It'd be like, I can't second guess what it is. So some of these things for him were like, what is this? And he went to his wife. I'm having some challenges. Here's what her seizures had increased. She was going home at night and just going straight to bed. Sometimes she wasn't eating. She wasn't looking after herself properly. And he was worried about it, like from a manager. And he was like worried about this incredible person who on paper should just be loving life, should be knocking it out of the park. She lived on site because that's how many properties and stuff that they have, that you get a place to live as well. And he was just saying that he was worried about her self-care and the trauma that was happening, or something was triggering these seizures. And he said to her, after speaking to his wife, she said she might be autistic because his wife's a teacher in school and therefore has had much more experience. And he's like, well, what do I do? And she's like, well, maybe, have a conversation with her. And he's like, oh. So he had a conversation with her in the car driving back after a day's work. And she said he was acting really weird, and he wasn't normally this weird. And then he came out and said it. Have you thought that you might be autistic? And he said she dealt with it really well and just kind of went, okay, I don't know. Because he didn't know whether she was going to go, oh, yeah, I am, and I've never told you. And yes, But no, she didn't. She was like, and then she only told me the other day that she then went and contacted one of her close friends and went, my manager said, no, like, what do you think? And this friend was like, actually, yeah, that would explain so much, because he was going on a journey at this time of learning about neurodiversity. So it was just, stars aligned.
Yeah.
Anyway, the work that they then did together, the care and consideration, he said it wasn't easy. They then start to think about it. They had to structure it. He had to understand that sometimes she liked to cry. The ability to let stuff out when she was maybe was overwhelmed was to cry. And for her, that's okay. And he needed to learn that is okay.
That's
he didn't
okay
need to
too.
panic and worry. And that there is times when she's crying and you need to worry, like any of us were. But a lot of the time, it's just she needed to lie down on her back, on the grass, on the floor, and just have a moment to just decompress, to meditate, to relax. and that was okay. And it could be at any point in the day, right? It could be just a moment to I just need to get this out of my system so that I can focus and get on with my job. And by learning all of these things about her, he was able to make the changes. But the amazing thing that happened is that these seizures that had been increasing stopped.
Oh my!
And she no longer started to get these seizures.
Amazing.
And so not just the impact on her from a health and well-being perspective, but she went from not liking work and she couldn't understand why, to being impactful and enjoying it, and not just enjoying work, but she enjoying life. Because then she was able, he said, you can ask me anything. So she was asking him questions like, and this may seem unusual to a lot of people, but what should I eat tonight? I don't know what to do. So then he helped her get delivery food so she didn't have to think about ingredients, and that she could it's just this human advice.
It's amazing.
I'm a human. How can you help me?
Yeah.
And the final bit to this is he was telling her, you need to be more open. You need to be more transparent. You need to share things with me. And she's like, well, if I'm going to share, I'm going to share it all. Are you ready for that? And he was like, yeah. And that was the food thing. But what he learned is then he was masking himself. He wasn't showing up as himself. He was this big burly guy who played rugby, used to drink a lot of pints as a guy and played cricket. And then he realized, what mask have I been putting on?
Oh my,
and actually,
goodness me.
He then started as a manager to go, I want to be this person that can share more, but I need to go on my own journey. I can't just tell this young person that they need to act. I now need to act myself. And the power of that, two people being able to transform the way they engage with other human beings, their enjoyment, their appreciation of life, that just doesn't impact them. That impacts everybody around them.
Of course it does. That is such a powerful story. It's a beautiful human experience story. I think it's oh my God, I get goosebumps on that one, mate. It's absolutely amazing. I just imagine the impact it's had on both of their lives, both in terms of their growth, how they are as people, and self-awareness and self-growth and all of the goodness that makes us human in that story. I think it's amazing.
And that's the power, right? Organizations can do a lot. You can do the training, development, the audit, the focus, the investment, and you will benefit, right? There's significant benefits you can make. But there's also individuals. If you're a manager, if you're an employee, if you're a human being, you can change the way you interact with another human being. And by association of that connection, it will improve you as a human being.
Of course
and
it
that,
will.
like, everybody can take responsibility and accountability of what they do on that basis.
That's where the impact is, I think. Of everything you shared so far in this conversation, I'm like, that's the bit, that's the connecting bit for me in that moment, in these moments where, as a manager, leader, just as people in organizations, to each other, how we treat each other, how we listen, how we support. In fact, it doesn't really matter what hierarchy you're in, actually, necessarily. I just think, that's a beautiful story. Okay. Where do we go from this one, Theo? Oh my God, I was like, wow. Okay. Let's switch it up a little bit, because I think I'm curious, because I think, as we've mentioned, and I think there's a bit of a theme that we keep coming back to here. It kind of required, this said manager to also listen, and not only to himself, but also to his employee. We've talked about, obviously, organizations and some of the companies he worked for unearthing that 1 in 10 is neurodivergent, and with additional 2 in 10 have some form of connection or association to it. What can companies do to move into listening, to really unlock what's inside, the insight that is already inside of your organization? What can they do? How can they go about it?
I think a lot of people don't feel like they can talk about it. From a parental perspective, there's still a lot of shame, depending where you are in the world. And you hear it on the playground, people still have this view of what autism is. People still Even the manager that I just mentioned, he said his view. He was like, she can't be autistic. That's like a naughty boy. And he said I need to own the fact
label.
that I that's how I perceived it, and I was wrong. So if we think about him as a human being in the transformation he's gone on, you cannot do that without being informed around the reality of the situation. And if you just go and listen to the media, if you go and read, then you will unfortunately still see very biased, nuanced views around what autism is, what ADHD is, what dyslexia is. And come back to my point, that is still it's a spectrum, or it's a we are all in different areas of that journey because we have different life experiences. And if we can help individuals understand that within organizations, that can really shift the thinking significantly. And it's better informed training and development, but more than that, stories, narrative. That story, that the shared experience there, that exists within your organization. There are people in your organization who struggle to get help for their child. It took me 4 years to get the diagnosis for ADHD and autism for my daughter. And then to get what we call in the UK an EHCP, an Educational Health and Care Plan, which enshrines the support in law up to the age of 25, because that's how it works here. So getting the diagnosis doesn't get you the help. You then have to go through another process to get help. So, and if you look at some areas of the world, there is no help, right? It is still only a disability and something that you don't want to talk about. So if we think about it in that context, if we're not going to empower our employees to show them that we care and that we value this topic and we appreciate it, by unlocking the communications around it, then people are not going to talk about it, and they're not going to share their stories, and they're not going to explain where the pain points are. Then we cannot improve their experience on that basis. We just cannot do it. And bringing one person in to do a talk. I mean, I've talked to so many hundreds of companies, right? Yes, fine, it's lovely, and I enjoy it, and I'm an inspirational speaker, right? By name, but there's got to be something beyond that. It's like going to a movie and thinking, I'm never going to buy another diamond again because I know the impact of what's happened on individuals to create that diamond, for example. I'm never going to do it again. And then you walk out and you get back into your life, and next thing you do, you find a diamond. It's what I use that as an example, but it's anything where there's this kind of thing that makes you go, yes. And then you walk out the room, and maybe for 5 minutes it stays with you, but life takes over. Organizations, individuals within organizations have a responsibility to start this conversation in a real powerful, meaningful, impactful way, but continuing it on. And that needs to be driven by your employees, by your workforce, but by your systems, your processes, and your procedures, that you put a commitment to this. And not, we'll do it next year. I hate that concept and idea. We'll worry about women next year. We're worrying about minority groups next year. We'll wait. There's too many to think about. So that's a next year project. People are in your organization today. People are being hurt. People are being harmed. People are underperforming. People are lacking of support. People's families, people's networks, people's children. Like, if you really want people to have a why when they come to work, think about that.
Yeah.
Because their families often are more important than anything else in their lives. So if you can do something that impacts their families, their children, their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, whoever, the people they love most, boom, there's the why. That's a reason for me to come to work every day.
Do you think, I don't know if this exists, so I'll ask the question. If, from a hiring point of view, we tend to focus a lot on skills, competence, experience, these types of things. Are there examples of companies also adding in the ND lens as well? Wouldn't it be great to kind of have a thing where I've got this competence, this experience, this, like from a framework or some kind of system and approach, so that as they're coming into the organization, there is some kind of lens in relation to ND, in addition to competence and skills and these other things? What are you seeing on that side?
So if we think about LinkedIn as an example, LinkedIn have added dyslexia as a skill.
They have
right?
dyslexic
So
thinking, I think it was. That was down
dyslexic
to the
thinking.
great work with Kate Griggs, actually, at
Yeah,
Made by
and so
Dyslexia.
I mean, so at least that's starting to say, let's think about it as a skill. The only problem is, the only issue I have with that is we're starting to get into very specific lines, and therefore that is dyslexic. Well, what about me? Because I have traits of dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, and probably dyspraxia
Yep.
and dyscalculia, as does my daughter. Right, so
Yep.
that's a level of complexity there. So I don't want to put all of those as a skill because they impact me in a different way, and then the co-occurrence, the combination of those, mean that each one impacts me then differently because they lean on one another, right? So I may be really great at communication, but then I have really big overwhelm and sensory overload. That means I can bomb out afterwards, right? And so when we think about it in that way, it can become a bit tricky. What I'd be much more interested in doing is looking at the skills and the challenges. Professor Amanda Kirby does some great work in this area with spiky profile, right? And I use that to advocate for my daughter and to advocate for myself. So a diagnosis is still about a box, right? You still go and get an autism diagnosis, ADHD diagnosis, dyslexia, blah, 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 blah. Whereas if we think about strengths and challenges, often a lot of people who are ND may have a lot of challenges, right? Which is what people have talked about a lot in the past, which I don't like. But as an individual, to know what those challenges are, and then to know what the significant strengths are, and then to think about how you can bridge over some of the challenges to get to those significant strengths is really important, right?
That's interesting. Yeah,
And I like,
that's interesting.
and a lot of people don't. The problem you've got as well, because you've spent all your life saying, Theo, you seem really confident, therefore you should always be doing this. Or Theo, you can't get overwhelmed because you're so confident. Or you can't. It gets really confusing that you can no longer understand what your strengths are, what your challenges are. When I used to fill out these psychometric tests and what have you, I'd get really confused going, do you get overwhelmed? And I'm like, well, I can, because I like going up on stage and doing this. So I must be really uber confident. So I'd always fill them out like to that extent of being exuberant and confident and verbose. But I'm missing out on all the challenges and only just like focusing on the strengths, which means if I walk into an environment, organizations think that I can achieve those strengths in whatever situation. No, I can't. I need the mechanisms and systems and processes in place to be able to get to those strengths. And if I can, then I'm the fastest human being in the world. I'm the greatest athlete. I'm the best scientist. I'm the most incredible artist. I'm the best talker, speaker, most creative dynamic, whatever it is, whatever. I can achieve that, but only if you do this. I can only see if you give me glasses. I can only walk with assistance. I can only, but if you give it, then I may well be the greatest that I can be in that given instance. And that is what organizations that do that well, they then get the best out of a group of people that otherwise are often misunderstood, mistreated, and unfortunately can end up in very challenging situations because of the fight or flight. People just leaving their work, leaving their focus, or fighting back against the system. And that's great if we're fighting back against political regimes we don't believe in, or fighting back because of climate change. But it becomes a challenge when an organization is trying to perform and you have individuals fighting back because they feel there's injustice, which actually they may well have been, but that can become really disruptive, right? So not only are they struggling, not performing, but then they're disrupting a proportion of the organization that then is collapsing under it. Now, that individual needs to be supported, not challenged in the way that we often do. And you get into that, right?
Yeah.
But if you understood the strengths and challenges and how to bridge, boom, watch them fly.
I mean, I think that's the two bits, right? So it's like your hiring selection moment is critical to identifying that and not just, ticking boxes or doing psychometrics that are, again, crazy limitations. And then you've got onboarding, which is then how do you ensure that you're supporting them in that very early and quite often for anybody quite vulnerable moment for most people at various times? And then you've got your leadership and management in terms of capability and understanding and awareness of those challenges and capabilities and superpowers to unlock that and enable that and support it in the right way. And I think that's an amazing challenge to overcome and to create, for sure, new experiences. Amazing.
But a very important one, very impactful one, and one that is worthwhile, and I think will significantly impact on those organizations that will ultimately outperform others.
Yeah. Hey, listen, there's a whole, I've always said it. My son, I see his superpower. I genuinely, and of course I'm biased, but I do see it. His dyslexia is one thing. And I remember watching a video of this dad in Ireland when we first discovered Tom was dyslexic. And I was like watching it and I was panicking. Like, what the hell is this dyslexia thing? I had no idea. I need to educate myself. And I just remember this. I remember it so clearly, this Irish guy regarding his daughter. And he just said, just get them through school, but just maintain their confidence. If they can get through school and at least maintain a level of confidence, then you've done okay, and fighting against that kind of systemic kind of system. So I think, for me, there's that side, but then what is superpower? And, for me, it's his empathic lens. He's got an amazing level of empathy. His ability to connect with other humans is really, really interesting to watch. So
we need more of that in the world based
on
what we're experiencing.
We do. Theo, thank you so much, mate. Thank you. We did it. I'm so grateful for your time, mate. Really, really am. How can people find you, connect with you?
LinkedIn. And if you don't like LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter and what have you. Theo Smith UK. You'll find me pretty much anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, brilliant. Theo, I've watched your journey from Sweden, mate. Absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful that you could join me on the show. And look forward to taking conversations further in the future. Have a good day, mate. And there you have it, another episode of the Experienced Designers podcast. Theo, thank you so much for sharing your insight and perspective on this massively important topic. So much potential for creating more human experiences. Exactly what we look for in this podcast. And of course, you, the audience and listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until the next time, bye for now.